In 10.1, we're learning about classifying angles. That's in our first example. The first thing you need to know is basically what are these types of angles? Well, an acute angle is going to be less than 90 degrees. So 90 degrees is kind of our benchmark here. Any angle that's less than 90 degrees, we call it acute. Any angle that's greater than 90 degrees, we call it obtuse. If an angle is straight up and straight across, and we see a box, okay, so this box right here that you see on number 2, that indicates a right angle, all right? So that is an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees. And then the last type of angle we have is called a straight angle. A straight angle is basically a straight line, and the measure is 180 degrees. So this is the foundation for this lesson. The different types of angles and being able to recognize them just by looking at them. What type of angle am I looking at? What is the measure for a right angle? 90 degrees. And what is the measure for a straight angle? That's 180 degrees. So go ahead and finish copying these down. I'll pause it for a second and then we'll continue. Alright, so now let's look at some examples. In the top left example here, what type of angle do you think that is? What type of angle? You think obtuse, acute, right? What do you think? Therese? Okay, he thinks obtuse. How do I know it's not a right triangle or a right angle? How do I know? Because, well, it's more than 90, but it doesn't have that square indicating. Now, just by looking at it, I think it's more than 90, but unless I specifically measured it, I couldn't be sure. But I know it's not a 90-degree angle because it doesn't have the box in the angle. And I know that it's slightly beyond the 90-degree mark, so I know that it's obtuse. All right? So we're basically just estimating here because we're not actually measuring it. Now, in the top right example, what type of angle is that? It's an acute. Okay? And the bottom left example, what kind of angle do I have? I have a straight angle. And in the bottom right example, it's a right angle. All right, so this is the basis, being able to recognize the different angles. Now let's talk about the relationship between angles, okay? Now, we have two terms that can describe the relationship between angles. One of them we call complementary angles. Complementary angles, again, we're talking about a relationship. So when two angles whose measures add up to 90 degrees. So when I compare them together, their angles add up to 90 degrees exactly. If it's 89 or if it's 91, they are not complementary. They have to be exactly 90 degrees. Now let me ask you this. What angle measures 90 degrees?
Right.
A right angle. So what it's saying is that these two angles together make a perfect right angle. Okay, so that part is important too. That the two angles together form a right angle. Now with supplementary angles, that's when two angles have measures that add up to 180 degrees. So both of them together add up to 180 degrees, and what type of angle would they form together? They would form what angle measures 180 degrees?
Straight.
A straight. Okay? So these angles together, supplementary angles, when they are added together, they form a straight angle. That's important when we start looking at these different diagrams in today's lesson. We'll see how they're related to each other and how I can use that information to solve for an unknown angle. All right, I'll just give you another minute to finish writing these down and then we'll continue. Okay, so let's use this information in example 2. All right, in example 2, I'm given two pairs of angles, and they're asking me to tell whether the angles are complementary, supplementary, or neither. And here's how I figure it out. I have an angle measure of 32 and an angle measure of 58. In order to tell whether they're complementary, supplementary, or neither, I need to add them together and see what the total is. And what's 32 plus 58?
90.
It's going to be 90 degrees. Since it measures exactly 90 degrees, they are complementary. And you can abbreviate COMP. Okay? All right, now in this second pair of angles, I have an angle measure of 79 and an angle measure of 101. So again, I want to add them together to see if the angle measures add up to one or the other. 79 plus 101 is 180. Make sure you label degrees. And these angles, therefore, are supplementary. Okay? Now, another thing you should notice, especially with B, how the diagram is drawn. Both of these angles are sitting on what kind of line? A straight line. So that should be my first indicator that I possibly have supplementary angles here. Now, that line could be a little bit off by 1 degree, and then it's not a straight line, or the way that it's sitting. Okay, so sometimes, looks can be deceiving, is what I'm saying. So you still do want to add the angles. Don't just say automatically that it's supplementary. All right? So that's how I identify whether or not an angle is complementary or supplementary. Now, remember what I said. If it doesn't add up to exactly 90 or exactly 180, it is neither. It's not whichever one it's closest to. It's going to be neither, even if it's off by 1 degree. Now, in example 3, we're using supplementary angles. So on the bottom of page 476, look at it with me. It gives me a beach chair, okay, or lounge chair. And it says that the measures of angles 1 and 2 are supplementary. So if they're supplementary, what is going to be their total measure?
180.
It's going to be 180 degrees. Okay? So their total measure is going to be 180 degrees. It tells me that angle 1 is 130, but it doesn't tell me what the measure of angle 2 is. So how can I solve? How can I figure out the measure of angle 2? Josiah?
Figure out what 130 plus is equal to.
Okay, very good. Basically, I can solve this as an equation. Just subtract 130 from both sides. Now, you don't necessarily have to set this up on your homework. You can just subtract the numbers. Okay? So the measure, absolutely, you can use calculators for the rest of the year. Measure of angle 2 is 50 degrees. All right? So anytime you're told that angles are supplementary or they're complementary, you automatically know the total. So if they give you the measure of one angle, you can subtract it and find the measure of the other one. Let's do a little bit of practice. All right, I want you to take these 4 angles. Tell me, are they acute, obtuse, straight, or right? All right, just based on their measure. All right, and this is what you should have, okay? Anything less than 90 degrees is acute, greater than 90 degrees is obtuse, exactly 180 is straight, and exactly 90 is a right angle. So that's what you should have. I don't see anybody that got it wrong, so that's good. All right, now, what if I gave you these 2 angles? 145 degrees and 35 degrees. Tell me if these angles are complementary, supplementary, or neither. I'll pause the recording and then we'll go over the answer. Anybody think they know? What do you think? Complementary, supplementary, or neither? Lily?
Neither.
Okay. What? Anybody else agree, disagree? Noah?
Supplementary.
Why?
Because 145 and 35 add up to 180 and 180 is supplementary.
Very good. Because when I add them together, they add to be exactly 180 degrees. Since they are 180 degrees, they are supplementary angles. Okay, supplementary angles.
It's a shoe.
What about the next pair of angles? Would this be complementary, supplementary, or neither? I'll give you a minute to work it, and then we'll go over the answer.
Neither.
Okay, why would it be neither?
Because when you add 60 and 25, it equals 85 degrees. And that's not 90.
Very good. So when you add them together, It does not equal 90 or 180, so it would be neither. This is how you would show it on your homework tonight. Okay, so you add them together, and if it's something other than 90 or 180, then you would say neither. All right, now, for this angle measure, we have 73 degrees. Give me the measure of a supplementary angle and the measure of a complementary angle if possible. Okay, if possible. Sometimes it might not be possible. So if I wanted to find the other angle, if it was complementary, what would I do? Andrew? Okay, you would need to subtract the one that you know from 90. So 90 minus 73 is 17 degrees. All right, so that's the work that you would need to show in your homework. Now, if it was supplementary, what are you subtracting from? Just tell me. It's going to be 180 now minus 73. Now it's just a matter of being able to put the numbers in your calculator to find 107 degrees. Okay? All right, do the same thing for 162 degrees. Give me the measure of the angle if it was complementary and supplementary, if possible. All right, remember the if possible part. All right, what do you think, Noah? Very good. The first one is not possible because the beginning angle measurement is already greater than 90 degrees. Let me ask you this. What if I give you a measure of 190 degrees? Would either one of them be possible? No, they wouldn't. Okay? So that's just a little bit of information for you. And then we do 180 minus 162, and we get 18 degrees for supplementary. All right, last but not least, I'm giving you this diagram of two different angles, okay? We're looking at the measure of angle ABD and the measure of angle CBD. Now, notice the midpoint is B, all right? So the way that I want to read this is A is my first point, B is my midpoint, D is my ending point. So the measure of this angle is 65 degrees. What is the measure of angle CBD? All right, so try to figure this out, and then we'll go over the answer. So I find this answer by realizing that these angles sit on a straight angle, and that they must add up to a total of 180 degrees. So 180 minus 65 is 115 degrees. So I know that that is the measure of the other angle. Okay, I'm just putting letters to it to actually classify or to name this angle. And if you understand that, that's everything you need to know for 10.1.